Welcome to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. I've moved on to the next book called or entitled Getting There, and the subtitle of this book is Choices Decide Destination. It's kind of a play on word showing that whatever we choose to do as we go through life will ultimately result in the directions we end up moving. These are family histories that have been passed down through generations, and so I've kind of changed some of the names up so that it doesn't upset any family members. Family history stories from the 1800s. The first chapter is Bad Moon Rising, told from the first uh, person perspective, and it starts out like this. My name is Bob Wintercrow, Tin Killer. I will tell you of my days and let my son and others tell of theirs. I lived when history was black and men's hearts were bitter. I remember some of the things of which I speak, and I remember all the stories of the evil we suffered and when our joy fled from us. When I grew older, my father, Johnny Graydeer, Tin Killer, told me of how we came to lose our home and be moved to a place we did not know. It was a place that did not hold our ancestors, a place where we had no ties to our forefathers. We had to start like the first people on earth had to start. It's a tale that can break a heart. Those we trusted thrust this upon us. I asked my father why we were driven from our homes and sent away to a different land that was a wilderness without a compare to where we came from. This new land was full of dangers from nature and from evil men that came here to hide from those that would seek them, men without conscience. Almost all of our history was passed down by the stories we tell. They give information on mistakes we made and honors that we won. They tell how our bravery and of the hard won wisdom of the Cherokee that we have gained. My father started his story with tears in his eyes. He was always sad to explain what happened to our people. His heart had been broken from the loss of my mother and my grandmother, and two of his brothers lost in the move. He said that it didn't look that bad as it began to happen, but as our people were drawn into the stormy nights of it all, it bore a great sting. It became as if someone had knocked down a hornet's nest and we stood there to see what would happen. He said that the treachery in what happened nearly tore the nation, that is to say, our people, apart. We lived on the land of our fathers longer than memory can tell. We were a free and a happy people. We had good, sound borders with our neighbors, the Creek, and others. The white men began to come into our land, and we gave land within our borders to them. Other native peoples did the same as well. We believed we could live beside as we did with our other neighbors. We lived well side by side for many years. He said that there were always more and more white men, and that they seemed to cover the land. They kept bringing more from across the sea. He said that the land couldn't bear so many men. This is when our neighbors became unworthy of respect. We had a treaty with the chief of the whites that said we could keep our land and the whites would stay off of our land. We could see the gathering clouds of discontentment, both with the whites and with the people. Father said, with a tear running down his face, that things only got worse from there. Our nation had a government and our own constitution, as did the whites. We answered only to the government in Washington. The government in Georgia was angry that we held land in what they thought of as their state and sued in court to make Cherokee land state land that they might govern us. They won the cause, and we had to fight in federal court, and we won back our land and the right to self govern. We established a new capital city called New Echota. That is where our government and constitution resides, for we had made ourselves a constitution also. It stood where the town of Calhoun, Georgia stands today. When we won back our right to govern, the president of the white men, Andrew Jackson, said he would not enforce the law and let them try to enforce it themselves, he said of us. Andrew Jackson did not like the Indian people. He wanted us to be moved to what they called the Indian Territory, later called Oklahoma. The state of Georgia sided with Andrew Jackson and started to hold lotteries to give away our land. Father said even some Cherokees entered the lottery and were given 160-acre plots. But most of the land would be deeded to white men. There was much talk within the tribe about what must be done. There was some talk of war, some of accepting the offer from the government to take $5.5 million and move to Indian Territory. While we were talking, the chief's brother and two others called upon the white man's government and made a treaty to move to the territory. It was called the Treaty of New Echota. It was not a legal treaty because the chief did not sign and the people did not vote, but the U.S. government accepted it. The people that chose the land and to stay on the 160 acres that that land, Jackson later took it back and gave it to the state from those Indians that had won in the lottery. And Father said they were the wretched ones who tried to work within the white law and were trampled under. The people would vote on anything that the tribe would do. There was a vote, but only 500 voted. 500 votes were cast in the Treaty of New Echota that the government used to force the people off of the land. There were 14,000 Cherokees, and many of these could have voted. This caused the nation to have great trouble, and factions were formed for those who wanted to honor the treaty and those who would not. There were great there was great anger among the people of the Cherokee, and the anger would not go away for many years. My father said that many were killed before the pain of that vote would be laid down and forgotten. When the soldiers came, there were more than 7,000 of them. Some were state soldiers and some were federal troops. When troops and braves came into conflict, so many died. A brave named Solly or Charlie, the American translation, and three of his friends killed two soldiers and were executed by the tribal police operated by Chief Uchilla. The first attempt at removal failed because of low water levels on the river, where the riverboat, smelter, and Little Rock operated. Many of the people died and many escaped. This attempt was stopped, and we thought we would be returned to the camps at Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Guntherville, Alabama. But we were put into 11 internment camps near Chattanooga and 10 other locations. Father told me that they remained in the camps during the summer. There were many of the people became ill, and more than 350 died in our camp. Some of the people asked the general to delay the move to cooler weather to ease the journey, and he granted the request. Our chief, John Ross, asked that the Cherokee Council be granted management of the move to oversee the removal. General Scott granted Principal Chief Ross a contract to oversee the removal with some soldiers present. Chief Ross organized 12 wagon trains with 1,000 people each to be moved. He assigned a full-blood tribal leader over each train. When the educated leader was not full-blooded, he might be considered, and some mixed blood were used as train leaders. Each train had at least one physician and interpreters, and every train had commissioners. He also assigned each train with managers, wagon masters, teamsters, and even grave diggers were included. The tribe brought the steamboat Victoria, where the chiefs and their families would ride at least to Fort Smith, Arkansas. Although the leaders rode in some comfort, they were not spared losses either. This is the part of the removal that the people called the Trail of Tears. The loss of life for the people was from about one fourth to one third of our whole nation died on the forced march. That is, from 4,000 to 6,000 people died in the march. We started in many different places, but were taken to Fort Gibson, where a final count was made to settle up the expenses that were to be paid by the Army. The people count didn't match the Army's count, and we were not fully reimbursed until another president took office and settled with a payment of more than $500,000 in 1842. Some of the people petitioned the state to become their citizens and stop being Cherokee. Still others deserted on the trail and became known as treaty breakers and lost any tribal rights and all tribal benefits. They were not counted either. My mother fell into that group because her family left the Trail of Tears as they were going through Arkansas. Some still talk of the Trail of Tears with family stories like Samuel Carter's account of the roundup, a reign of terror from the fort with the jagged wall fanned out across the nation, invading hamlets, cabins, and every habitation with bayonets and pistols. We were herded into concentration camps. We were threatened with knife and pistol and rifle, but we were threatened into obedience. I have my own memory of that terrible winter, for I learned to hate the white soldiers who took away our homes and families. The walking could not be slower for the young or for the old. We were not stopped. We could not stop for the ice or for the snow. We marched toward a new home that none wanted. The soldiers had warm clothes and we were freezing in our winter or our summer wear. Not one of the soldiers said a word of sorrow for my mother when she died on the march. Many of the soldiers could only see the color of our skin and hate in their faces for my race. Father said that the $5 million the government would give the Cherokees would be divided among the people, and that the 500,000 would be for education for the people. Father said the principal chief John Ross and the council protested in Washington and before the Congress, but that they ratified the treaty anyway on the 23rd of May, 1836, the blackest day in the people's history. This resolution passed by only one vote in Congress, to which Father said that most men are honorable, red or white. Dad said that the people that had made the treaty left voluntarily. They started leaving in March 1837. Father said that almost 2,200 people left as volunteers. They made their way west by riverboat and wagon train. Their their choice, they chose the route and the time they would depart. The rest of the people would be forced to leave at the choice of those appointed by the government. This meant that you would not be able to choose the way you would travel or the time that you would travel. All of this would be left up to those who are forcing you to leave. It was an act of war against a peaceful indigenous Indian people. Many white people were outraged by the illegal act of a few powerful men. My father said that in April, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a letter to President Martin Van Buren asking him to stop so vast an outrage upon the Cherokee. This letter was to no avail as President Van Buren signed into law what President Jackson had started. Many protests were made, and even a court decision could not stay the removal of the Indians from the valuable land. Father said, as things became more evident that we would be removed and more evil acts would be done by some Cherokees, as we were gathered at gunpoint from our homes, we were put into camps, as many as could be gathered from both Alabama and Georgia. These were family stories handed down from my grandmother. Although I never met her, I am glad to know our history. It's an oral family history. I hope you enjoyed this story. I will present chapter 2, which is entitled The Beaver Hunt. That's another family history story. I subtitled it A Working Vacation. If you enjoyed this and you want to know more or get ahead of the game, you could go to my webpage, which is curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com. There's a link that'll take you to Amazon there, and they come in paperback like this one. They also come in ebooks. You can download on an e-reader or in your computer, or however you read electronic books nowadays. Or you can go to my webpage on Facebook, which is Curtis Jones Author Page, Facebook, and both of these have links that will take you to Amazon where you can acquire these books. I hope you enjoyed this. If you do, hit the like button and subscribe. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, and it'll give you a notification when I post. Uh, and tell your friends about it so that they can also hear these stories. They're all of the stories, or most all of the stories that I write, are true stories from my history as a young child, my history with my wife for almost 50 years, and now going on to this uh, family histories that have been passed down. God bless you. Take care of you, and have a good week.